Hello viewers, my name is Leopold Munende. Thank you for tuning in to New Zim TV. With me today is Richard Mahomva, a political scientist and coordinator for Leaders for Africa Network. We are talking of the shutdown, which has turned chaotic. Mr. Mahomva, welcome to New Zim TV.
My pleasure.
Thank you so much.
Hello viewers.
Recently, the Zimbabwe Congress for Trade Union called for a 3-day shutdown, a national shutdown, which initially had been called to be a peaceful march, a peaceful demonstration against President Emerson Mnangagwa's call or hike in price of fuel. Over the past week, we have seen some chaos, some violence, especially in Harare, Epworth, Chitungwiza and Bulawayo. Maybe we can get an understanding of how you have seen these events which have unfolded.
The citizens have got a democratic right to contend policy positions. It is a democratic right even for civic society to mobilize citizens to challenge certain positions that are put across by the establishment. But however, there is a problem with a situation whereby you see protests that are supposed to be peaceful turning out to be violent. In this case, we saw a situation whereby this particular protest ended up losing a center of command, largely as a result of the fact that there was an unmanaged euphoria, and this unmanaged euphoria saw masses looting into shops, destroying private and public infrastructure. And at the end of the day, that could be generously misconstrued to say probably the initiators of this particular shutdown wanted to manipulate public emotions so as to pursue a violent end. But again, you would notice that there's been an escalating tension across the body politic in Zimbabwe since the 1st of August, the election results and all of that. So basically, it is justified for people to express concerns, but the manner in which sometimes these concerns end up losing a center of command is a problem, and that might actually create barricades, administrative barricades to such protests, especially on the part of the establishment in the future.
The government has blamed the movement for democratic change.
Basically, the allegation largely on certain civic society groups is not just a blank allegation, but it is an allegation that is backed up by state security evidence.
But why wouldn't state security act on a matter if they get the evidence before something like that has happened?
Well, probably that could be a gap on the part of state security, but again, it is also not a prudent thing to preempt certain processes, because the moment you preempt certain processes, you are not able to exhume the violent character that you allege to a particular party or the allegation that you claim. So at the end of the day, it's a complex dynamic which might even entail the failure of state security in making preemptive measures to some of these issues. Why? Because we have largely been a peaceful country, and when there are these emerging trends of violence, they could even be hard to manage or even to preempt against the background of our rich culture of peace in this country.
But are we not going back to the situation, to the Robert Mugabe era, where opposition activities were alleged to be funded by non-governmental organizations?
It is a historical fact that you cannot want to dismiss, that opposition activities to a great extent have been financed by the external world. And well, there is really nothing wrong with anyone funding anyone with regards to our divided political interests. But the problem is when certain initiatives are funded to bring about instability. But with this case, I think it is narrow to solely argue that there's been a clear case of funding, and because there's been a clear case of funding, it means that there was violence, because we saw protests coming out of our western suburbs in a more organic manner, which brings me to the point that I highlighted, that in as much as this could have been organized, it lost a center of command. People had to be on the fore of what they thought was the right thing to do at the expense of other people's democratic interests and wishes.
Recently, we witnessed a temporary shutdown of the internet by the state, and according to section 61 and 62, that the state infringed on its citizens' right to information.
It is also prudent to look at the security perspective, because there is a roaming street argument that probably that was initiated to try and curb the rioters from mobilizing one another with regards to the looting and all of that. So probably if it was based on security terms, I strongly feel it is something that is just, it's not every time that rights should be ceded to citizens to absolutely give freedom, especially if that particular freedom is abused to limit the freedoms of other citizens. For instance, some people that were being barricaded out of the central business districts countrywide, that is unjustified.
Don't you think government aided the protesters or the demonstrators by shutting down the internet, in the sense that even if those who were leading the shutdown wanted to communicate to their members that let us now stop, they could not?
Initially, I do not think that there was an elimination in the communication line, but rather, initially this whole thing lost a center of command. I think those who initiated it assumed that it will assume a magnitude, a particular magnitude, a particular amount of traction, which of course went out of hand and overboard. So at the end of the day, it brings us to a crisis of managing what is supposed to be peaceful protests. And as a result, when we're confronted by such a situation, there might be need for policy interventions to extensively manage the culture of protests in this country. Because I strongly feel it's a new privilege that we have enjoyed, and we have taken it a bit overboard, and it might need to be curtailed, it might need to be managed. How, I do not know. It's subject to public engagement.
Okay, and then the army got into the picture. The army was accused of killing people, shooting innocent and armed civilians, and it was also alleged that it was beating civilians in their homes, whilst police officers across the country were throwing tear gas canisters in people's homes. So the issue here is who was being feared during the shutdown.
The measure of antagonism in all this was much drawn from those that were barricading the street. This is according to my experience and to the Awash evidence in social media. It is those that were looting shops. If you go to Bulawayo, a greater part of the shops in the western suburbs were plundered, they were looted. And my greater knowledge of things again was that there were some civic society groups that were on the fore. We have always been traditionally aligned to the opposition's initiative for expressing discontent about administrative issues. Yes, one might also put across an argument that ZANU-PF youth have been on the forefront of this, but not according to the knowledge that I've had access to in the social media. But even if it be the case, I do not think that one is then supposed to problematize the involvement of the ZANU-PF youth as you are putting across, in the sense that this thing ended up taking more of a political dimension than it was supposed to take, more of a civic approach. Because you'd recall that even if you look at the demographic inclusion of those that were part and parcel of the protest, it ended up becoming ordinary citizens and not the workers who were initially supposed to be demonstrating for US dollar salaries. So at the end of the day, I think there were a lot of groups that ended up coming on board beyond even the partisan perspective. So I think there is need for us to locate how these various groups were mobilized into the plunder, into the barricading and into the looting.
Already we have a report from 1 August when members of the military shot about 6 unarmed civilians in Harare CBD. And now we experience what others are saying is heavy-handedness from the same state, the same perpetrators of violence on 1 August, the military, who are now being accused of killing more than they did on 1 August. You see, that is the challenge, whereby people are now saying they feared the army. At the present moment, the army is roaming the streets of Harare, the streets of Harare are now militarized. The western suburbs are militarized. There are trucks, there are military trucks all over.
Yep.
The question, of course, at the present moment is who deployed the army and who gave the army the right to shoot if they did. SABC, international organizations, SABC, Reuters, BBC, they are reporting that no less than 3 people have been shot so far.
Perfect. You are talking about an effect, and in this case it's a military effect. And the simple level of analysis for everything that we look at as an effect is that an effect emerges as a result of a cause. So at the end of the day, our analysis, if our analysis is to be sincere, we have to recognize that yes, there are killings. But at the end of the day, what motivated the killings? So at the end of the day, you cannot want to have an analysis that only measures on the effects and not the cause of the effect.
But are you justifying
because for the killings, no, it's not justifying. It is saying for the killings, there was violence. And because there was violence, there was the killings. So at the end of the day, what needs to be done? There should be no violence in the future so that killings are prevented. And those that initiate these demonstrations should make sure that these demonstrations have got a center of command. This is why from the outset I indicated that it lost the center of command. From being peaceful, it turned violent. And the moment protests become violent, the state is provoked and is bound to react. But it's natural in any part of the world.
I do not think there is anything which can justify the killing of unarmed civilians.
All human life is of value, but the point is if there are no harsh preemptive measures, we could have even witnessed more harm and more damage. But the moment the state intervenes to preempt further damage to more human life, because remember, there were people that were actually being prevented from accessing entry points into their CBDs violently. So at the end of the day, we should not let disgruntled voices create a euphoria that breeds violence and unmanaged violence on its behalf.
Of course. Thank you so much for watching our show on Museum TV. My name is Leopold Munende. With me today was Richard Mahomva, a political scientist and coordinator for Leaders for Africa Network. Please log on to our website www.newzimbabwe.com and also follow us on Twitter @newzimbabwe.com. Also subscribe to our YouTube channel, Museum TV.